To welcome Jane Higgins. We're talking about native plants, insects, and birds. The question is, why is what you plant in your landscape important? And here's the science to prove how important your landscape choices are. We'll be sharing a copy of Dr. Doug Tallamy's presentation, Restoring Nature's Relationships with Amazing Nature Photography, which shows the relationship between plants and wildlife.
Thank you. So just as an introduction, Dr. Tallamy is a now famous professor of entomology up at the University of Delaware, where he works. And entomology, in case you don't know, like I didn't know, that's the study of insects. And so I always ask before we get started, is anybody a science person here, retired scientists or any? Okay, so I'm going to apologize right off the get-go. I am not a science person. Okay, I do my best. But if you feel that I'm mispronouncing something, just a little grace and mercy is all I ask, okay? Because I'm not a science person. Okay, so we're going to get started. If you want to go ahead and click forward. Has anyone seen this bird before? If you've traveled, sounds like we have some travelers in the group. Well, this is a Quetzal bird, and it is mostly down in Costa Rica, but it's becoming endangered because, next slide, it only eats the native avocado, and the native avocado is getting wiped out with development, which we can surely all relate to here, right, because we're having lots of development. So next slide, what people are doing is replanting those native avocados for the birds to survive. Yes, and on the next slide, you'll see the jaguar, his photography. I should have said up front, too, this is Dr. Tallamy's presentation. I heard him speak about 5 years ago down in Vero Beach, and I sent him an email and said, would you send me a few of your slides, please, for a presentation I'm working on? He sent me the whole 350-slide deck. And I was like, wow, but his photography is amazing. So what I've tried to do is whittle it down to 100 and something. We're not going through 350 here today, but to try to make it into a 20-minute version. But this is all his work. This is not my work. So the jaguar is having a hard time out in the world because on the next slide, the only thing it can eat is indirectly these palm nuts. These palm nuts are eaten by, on the next slide, the peccaries, which are kind of like a big pig. If you keep going, yep, sorry, next slide. And the peccaries are what the jaguar eats. So without those nuts that we just saw, there's no peccaries, and without the peccaries, there's no jaguars. Okay, so it's kind of the big circle of life if you ever watched the Lion King movie. So on the next slide, what he's saying is specialization is not some one-off thing. That is really the rule. That's the way the world operates. And on the next slide, he shows a picture of the whole globe because basically that happens everywhere throughout the entire world. It's not just North America, South America, or the Americas. It's everywhere, and it starts with plants. So even animals we don't think have specialization do. Yep, and you want to keep going to our chickadee slide. Anybody from up north familiar with the chickadee bird? Yep, anyone? Anybody know a chickadee? Okay, well, that's on a slide coming up here because the chickadee is mostly a bird, a small bird up north. It goes chickadee, chickadee, dee, dee. It's very much in Maine and up in New England area and the Delaware area where Dr. Tallamy is. But he's using this as an example, but this example does apply to us. So just kind of hang in there and we'll make that correlation in a bit. Are you able to advance to our chickadee slide? Oh, I guess yeah, that's a little too far, sorry. Oh, I guess maybe we didn't do the chickadees yet. Okay, this is the one on the next slide, the purple flowers, that's the phlox. Or do we have any northern transplants here? Okay, so you've probably seen this flower. This flower can only be pollinated by a very specialized insect. On the next slide, you'll see here's somebody trying to pollinate it, but they can't get into that tiny little hole in the middle there. On the next slide, you'll see there is a bee with a very long tongue circled around there. That's the only guy that can get in there and pollinate that flower. So if you don't have that specialized bee, those flowers are not going to create seeds and not going to be able to propagate. Okay, so the next slide, please. And this, again, is a very specialized caterpillar that has to have coral honeysuckle in order to live. And next slide. There's a coral honeysuckle. We love coral honeysuckle. That's a great plant here. Next slide. So even animals we don't think of as having specialized relationships do. And if you go to that next slide, here's the chickadee. I knew we'd get there eventually. Sorry, I got my slides probably out of order a bit there. So he's going to make this example with the chickadee. And the chickadee here is eating bird seed, and a lot of people think that birds primarily eat bird seed. And adult birds can eat a lot of bird seed. However, baby birds cannot eat bird seed. Baby birds can only eat caterpillars. Anybody know why that is? Any of the science people? Okay, well, we're going to find out. So if you go to that next slide, it's not going to be right away. It's going to lead up to it. But here's a caterpillar, and they are bringing caterpillars to their young all day long, every 3 minutes, because that's the only thing baby birds eat. And if you keep going, next slide. Why do they feed their young mostly caterpillars? Well, next slide. This is not just the chickadee. This is relevant to all birds. All baby birds can only eat caterpillars. So if you keep going on the next slide, why is that? Gorgeous photography again. It could be because they're beautiful. And the next slide does show a lot of very beautiful caterpillars out there in the world. Very colorful. You'd think the birds would just zero in on a bright red caterpillar, right? But if you go to that next slide, it's really because of the science part. The science part is that caterpillars are just full of ooey gooey, juicy stuff. If you've ever accidentally, hopefully, broken a caterpillar open, you know it's just complete goo. Well, that ooze is scientifically proven to be the proteins that baby birds need, which of course they're not going to get out of bird seed because there's nothing ooey gooey juicy in bird seed, right? So if you go to that next slide, here he has a lot of great photography of caterpillars because there are so many different kinds of caterpillars out there in the world. And if you keep going, this is the science behind the caterpillars. It's because caterpillars have this thing in them called carotenoids that is the proteins and all that stuff that babies need. I don't understand that, but some people really get excited about that slide. So if you go to the next one, these are the carotenoids we eat. So we eat carotenoids too, okay? We just didn't know that, but lots of things we eat, mostly green leafy vegetables like kale and broccoli and things like that, all have carotenoids in them too that are very vital for us, okay? So next slide. So why do baby birds need those? Because that's what makes them develop their color, their sexuality, their immune system. All those things are not going to develop without the carotenoids in the caterpillars. Okay, so next slide. Now, chickadees can't make carotenoids on their own. They're not plant eaters, so they have to find something that eats plants that's going to create those carotenoids. Keep going, please. Thank you. Since they can't eat plants, okay, I said that already, sorry. Yep. So here we go. Insects. Insects like to eat plants, right? Now, and this chart shows you which insects produce the most carotenoids, right? And I was really hoping it would be on the far right, which is red ants and cockroaches. Wouldn't it be nice if they were the ones the baby birds wanted to go after? But it's not. What the baby birds want is over on the far left, the big juicy caterpillar, that's that green lumpy looking thing. That's what they want. But you can see in all these other bugs and insects, there are a good amount of proteins and carotenoids in those as well. The birds know this. In this tiny little itty bitty brain of theirs, they know which things to go after to feed their young, which I think is just amazing. So next slide. So for most birds, caterpillars are not an option. It's a requirement. And if you keep going, next slide. This is working great. I'm so happy. Thank you so much. So there's not going to be any chickadees or baby birds where there's not enough caterpillars. Next slide. So how many caterpillars does it take to make a nest of chickadees? And sometimes when there's kids in the audience, I ask them, you know, for a guess, just wild guess, how many you think it might take. And on the next slide, it's because the parents are bringing caterpillars every 3 minutes all day long from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. So if you're a really smart math person, you could probably do the math real quick, but that's a heck of a lot of caterpillars, right? And a chickadee has a nest size that averages 3 baby chicks. So that's all day long, that's all they're doing, they're bringing caterpillars, mom and dad. So next slide, please. So how many species? They really don't care, but Dr. Tallamy, of course, did the science, and he watched a nest of chickadees and realized they brought 17 species of caterpillars in just 3 hours, all collected from within 50 feet of the nest. So they don't want to go far looking for these caterpillars. They want them to be close by because it takes a lot of energy looking for caterpillars and flying back and forth. So for one nest, it takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise one nest of chickadees. That is a lot of caterpillars, right? So, and if you go to the next slide, they basically fledge, you know, raise their young for 16 days. So over the course of 16 days, they've got to find 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise these average 3 baby birds. That's a lot of work, right? And the reason this picture is here, and that one and the next one, is because a chickadee is on average a smaller bird. It's only about this big, and we don't have them here. But we do have the red-bellied woodpecker, and we have all these birds, which are about the size of the red-bellied woodpecker, and they're 8 times larger than a chickadee. So that kind of means they need 8 times more caterpillars for their babies because their babies are going to be 8 times larger than baby chickadees, right? Because we don't have little baby chickadees here. So you think about that and you're like, wow, where are all these caterpillars coming from? So this is the point he's going to make if you go to the next slide. And by the way, there's many other birds and animals that need these bugs and insects with the carotenoids just as a regular course of their life. Hummingbirds' diet is actually 80% insects. Most people think hummingbirds are living on mostly nectar. They are very important pollinators, but 80% of their diet is insects. And on the next slide, all these birds eat insects, and there's no way you can read this, but suffice it to say, almost all birds are going to eat some insects, right? So on the next slide, this is kind of a sad slide, because on the left, that round blob pretty much is a nest of baby birds that all they had to eat in the area was bird seed, so they died. So it's a nest of dead baby birds, because they cannot live on just bird seed, as we just learned. They've got to have the caterpillars, the juicy carotenoids. Okay, so what types of landscapes are capable of producing 6,000 to 9,000 times 8 caterpillars for our baby birds? Well, they need diversity, and if you go to the next slide, to answer that question, we're going to go all the way back to the beginning. Remember the initial hypothesis he was making about the jaguars and the birds and how they have a very specialized relationship? He's going to bring that back home here. So on the next slide, plants don't want to be eaten, right? None of us really want to be eaten. And plants do a very good job of protecting themselves. So on the next slide, we're going to go through the fact that they have a pretty good defense mechanism. And an example, I'm pretty sure, I want to make sure, but on the next slide, he's going to go through why do insects eat plants? How does that happen? And next slide. They specialize on only a few type of plants. Okay? Insects only go after certain plants. And on the next slide, he's going to go through, I'm pretty sure, yes, the monarch butterfly. And has everybody heard about the monarch butterfly plight and the fact that they can only eat milkweed? Everybody familiar with this? I mean, it's been all over the news. And if you go to that next slide, milkweeds do a really good job of protecting themselves with this stuff called cardiac glycoside. And basically what that is, on the next slide, is when you break the stem open, if you've ever broken a milkweed stem open, it's got this ooey gooey white milky substance. It kind of looks like Elmer's glue. Yep, anybody seen that? Okay, well that stuff, if a caterpillar eats that, it will glue their jaws shut. So that's a pretty good defense mechanism, right? The plant is saying, you are not going to eat my stems, pretty much. That's not going to happen. But if you go to the next slide, here it is, that's that white gooey stuff when it's exposed to oxygen. On the next slide, if you've ever watched a caterpillar, a monarch caterpillar, this is what they look like, eat a milkweed plant, it's absolutely fascinating. I highly encourage you to just sit there and watch it. It happens pretty fast. It's not going to take a long time. Next slide. So it'll start at the outside of the leaf, and it'll eat its way inward. And on the next slide, I think, yep, here's the picture of, notice how it's not breaking the stem, and the stem is where the white stuff is that's going to glue its jaw shut. That caterpillar knows in that itty-bitty brain of theirs not to break the stem, right? Because that's really bad. And if you've ever had milkweed plants, after those caterpillars get done chomping all the leaves, you're left with just a bunch of stems like this, and you're thinking, oh no, my plant is gone. But the plant knows, and it'll come back, it'll leaf out again from just these stems. So don't give up hope on that plant. It knows to regenerate leaves from just looking like a bunch of stems that were left by the time the caterpillars got done with it. So that is like so cool that Mother Nature knows all that. So if you go to the next slide, the downside of specialization is that now milkweeds are all that monarchs eat. And we know what's happening to the milkweeds. They're getting like destroyed with land development, especially out west, which is where most of the monarchs migrate and live. The milkweed plants are just getting wiped out. So when you go to the next slide, he's got a lot of science statistics here about monarchs have declined dramatically, and it's because their food source has declined rapidly. Now there's also a few other factors like, you know, climate change, pollution, pesticides, all that kind of stuff, but the number one source is their food supply is gone, and then all those other factors do come into the picture eventually. Okay, so next slide. So pretty much all these insects are going to rely on specialized hosts. Next slide. We're like moving it here, aren't we? So we can use that knowledge to build landscapes that support effective food webs. And on the next slide, because now we know that these birds need these caterpillars and we've got to do something about it. So if you keep going through the next slide, here what he's showing in his awesome photography on his 10-acre piece of land with his wife up there is which caterpillars are on which types of plants. So here the blinded sphinx has to have a black cherry tree. That's a very specialized. And on the next one, this type of caterpillar has to have that kind of plant. Next slide. Same thing, this kind of caterpillar has to have that kind of plant. Next slide. The same, a spotted forester has to have the grape. Next slide. Same thing, relationship there. And the next one's coming up. Oh, one more, sorry. Keep going. Oh, I guess two more. There we go. And here is the baby birds that are happy in between their 3-minute intervals for who knows, like maybe 1.5 minutes, both happy and fed. So that's what I always like to say about this picture. This is the happy and fed. They're not squawking. They're not saying, feed me, feed me, feed me. They look to be pretty happy there. Do we have any birders in here? Because sometimes people will say, oh, I know that's a variole. I know this is what, I'm not a birder. I just appreciate the variety of birds. Okay, so next slide. And again, he's showing the caterpillars on the bottom and need that particular kind of tree on the top. And if you keep going, we can go through a lot of these pretty quick. This is for a maple tree. Next one. This is for the elm, I think. And next one. So remember, 90% of insects eat plants, only plants with which they have co-evolved. That's not going to change. It's been that way for millions and millions of years, and it's going to be that way for millions and millions of years. We are not going to change that in the lifetime of humans on this earth, okay? So these are a few oak tree caterpillars, and just a little hint, oak trees are the heroes of our story here. I love all your oak trees out back. Yay, oak trees. Okay, so keep going. So it's not just birds that eat insects, although this guy looks like he's got a mouthful of them. If you keep going. All of these animals also eat a lot of insects in their diet. And a lot of times we look at this slide and we're like, ew, we don't really like some of these animals. We don't like, you know, rats or possums or raccoons, but they all serve a very vital role in the world. Like we know bats eat tons of mosquitoes. And if we get, you know, pesticide everything, then the bats can't do their job and we have a mosquito problem. Also, possums eat a lot of ticks. Without possums out there eating ticks, we would be overrun with ticks, and ticks are no fun for humans. So they all serve a very valuable purpose in the food web, and it's very important that we help them out whenever we possibly can. So next slide. Another interesting fact is that foxes' diet is made up 25% of insects. I would have never thought that. And on the next slide, there's a very interesting fact I want to look up here. We don't have big black bears here, but 23% of a black bear's diet is insects. During a forest tent caterpillar outbreak in Michigan, individual black bears were eating 25,000 caterpillars a day. How did they figure that out? I have no idea. But you can imagine 25,000 caterpillars, that's some serious poundage of caterpillars and proteins and carotenoids and all that stuff. So they were doing pretty well. They probably single-handedly wiped out the caterpillar outbreak problem wherever they were. So, okay, so we'll keep going. Yep, a world without insects is a world without diversity. And if you want to skip through these next couple, we can go pretty quick. We are losing our insects, very similar to the monarch plight. And the reason we're losing our insects on the next slide is because we're losing the plant habitat that they need to survive, right? No plants that they need, then no birds, because the birds can't feed the baby birds, and it's just all going to start breaking down. You're doing great. You know the next slide before I know. You're going to be giving this presentation in no time, which would be great. I'd be happy with it. So here he's making the case for how many birds are going extinct, again, because of their habitat loss. And on the next slide, why can't we sustain biodiversity in our parks? People say, make more parks. That's the answer. Well, on the next slide, what you're going to see is if you take a very large swath of land on the top and you make it, here's part of that swath made into a park on the bottom, The next slide does show you on a chart, on the top is the large piece of land, and when you have environmental factors happen, that land can recover, right? On the bottom, when you have, on a small piece of land, you have environmental factors, it's much harder. And an example that we can all relate to here in Florida is hurricanes, or we have droughts, or we have too much rain, or not enough rain. There seems to always be something going on here. That's the kind of environmental factors he's talking about, that the small pieces of land can't recover from. Has anybody been to Turkey Creek Sanctuary? Okay, so that's a great example here of the smaller piece of land. And if you remember years ago, a hurricane came through there, and there's a lot of trees still there that are leaning like this. That's the example of that land is not going to be able to recover from that well. You know, I'm so grateful for the animals that we have there, but it's not a big enough piece of land for it to recover totally the way it could if it was like major acreage, right? Major, because those poor tall trees are still like this, or they have to remove them because then it's a fire hazard, and then, so we're kind of messing up the ecological pattern when we intervene because nature can't take care of itself on that small of a piece of land, okay? Okay, so next slide. So our natural areas are not enough. And that's not the answer, just to let you know. Okay, so next slide. And not only that, we're battling invasive plants here in Florida because we are the land of everything can grow here, right? And everybody brings everything they think can grow here from every place else, and they grow it here, and then it escapes, and next thing you know, it takes off. So this is that dreaded kudzu plant that just covers everything. And sometimes people say, well, it's green, that's good, right? No, because can the native anything for an animal get through that, right? Can a native butterfly get through that to lay some eggs to create native caterpillars? Even if it could the birds get through that to find the caterpillars? No. So it really screws up the whole ecological thing by kind of overwhelming native habitat completely. And then to top it off, we get the invasive species of animals coming in, like now we're getting those really weird lizards here. That's going to have an impact, and other weird things coming in here. So not good. So the native habitats struggle with that. We do a lot of cleanups at the local parks of Turkey Creek and Erna Nixon of invasive plants, and it is never ending. We are never going to declare we're done there. So it's a constant battle. So we can measure what happens when we replace native plants with plants from outside communities. Next slide. So here he does a quick example. If you had a piece of land that's here 12 foot by 12 foot, and you get to choose what you plant on that 12 foot by 12 foot piece of land to support the environment, you get to make those choices. So next slide. You could choose to put an oak. And on the next slide, he shows you, because he counted, that on a white oak at his head level, he counted 410 caterpillars, 19 species. So that's a good choice, right? Because I told you the oaks are the hero of our story today. So yeah, good choice. So on the next slide, you could pick the black cherry. Again, the black cherry is a native plant. And on the next slide, it shows you that those 239 caterpillars, 14 species. Yay, good. Next slide. Or you could pick the calorie pear. Anyone familiar with this? Bad guy, villain of the story here. So on the next slide, it shows that they support one caterpillar, one species on that whole tree. That's pretty pathetic. So let's not choose that. Next slide, burning bush, again, another non-native. And on the next slide, supports hardly anything. So on the next slide, he does a summary showing, here's what we just went through. If you could choose what to plant on your 12 by 12 foot piece of property to support caterpillars and nature, you'd probably pick the ones that have the most caterpillar species. That's what we want you to pick. So on the next slide, This is the calorie pear. Boo hiss. Anyone seen this guy up north? Okay. Well, it's on the invasive plant list now, so let's hope you don't ever see it. But they are still selling it in big box stores, so you have to know what you're looking for. Very pretty tree, does not make pears, even though it's called the calorie pear. It's just very ornamental, okay? And what it does, and on the next slide, it shows you all those flowers blew over across the road to the field and took over that field, whatever native habitat was there, and now they're over there supporting virtually no wildlife. That's why it's on the invasive species list now. So we don't like that one. So what he's trying to get to here is land ownership is more than a privilege, it's a responsibility. Next slide. Which plants should we choose to plant in our landscapes? Well, we just had that great 12 by 12 example, but keep going. What he's done with a bazillion research students is, there's no way you can read this, but he's taken every species of plant and classified that based on the number of species of insects and caterpillars it supports. And he's done that in descending order. So up here on the left, on the top left is Quercus, which is where the oak trees, anything in the oak tree family is Quercus, right? That supports the most. Yay! All the way down here to the bottom right. Yes, that's where the calorie pear would be. There's others that support 0. And on the next page, what he's done is he's put that out there by zip code for us. So we can look up our zip code, and I'll have this slide later in the presentation too. You can go to any of these major well-known national organizations or Florida organizations, punch in your zip code, and it'll give you that list, best to worst, okay? Some of them even do it in order of like trees, shrubs, flowers, so you don't have to go through all of those to find it. But the important thing is finding what works well here for you. So for instance, we don't really have white oaks, but we have lots of gorgeous other kinds of oaks that do well here. And depending where you are, oaks don't do as well beachside as they do on the mainland. So that's why the zip code thing is important. Okay, so next slide. We can also create foraging hubs. And on the next slide, I know we got some people here about my age, so you've probably seen this in the back of an airline seat when you've flown before. This is where, you know, you have the hubs for airlines, and he's kind of making the example of those are, you could say they're like foraging hubs. So on the next slide where he showed that birds know which native trees to go for to find the plants that have what they need, to find the insects on those plants. So here it's hard to read, I know, but there's an oak, a cherry, a pine. All those are native plants, and they're ignoring everything else around there because they're just going to say, yuck, not native, I don't want, you don't have any food for me, I'm going to ignore you, right? So, and then he shows us an example on the next slide. Oh, again, he gets back to this. All the native plants are in the top left corner. Those are the ones to do. But on the next slide, I think, he's making this point of 5% of native plants will support 73% of available caterpillars. So if you can't do anything else, if you got the space for it, plant an oak tree, right? Because you're going to support the most with an oak tree. Okay, so we should know this in our landscape choices. This is an oak we don't really have around here, but see it supports 557 species of caterpillars, yay. And on the next slide, ginkgo, if you've ever seen this, it is a very popular tree for artists to do, but it supports very little, 5 species. Nah, probably don't need to do that. Next slide. This is a native, beautiful native flower, supports 456 species, yay. Next one, not so much, nothing on this one. Next slide. And this one supports virtually nothing. Next slide. This is a native viburnum. They have very pretty flowers, has a good support population. And next slide. So this is our yard, your yard. We all started here in Florida with a nice mowed yard because that's what we get here in Florida when you come down, right? And he's saying you can make a choice what to put in your yard. On the next slide, basically look at your yard as bird feeders. The trees and plants in your yard are bird feeders. Whether you look at it that way or not, they are there to feed birds, to make caterpillars. So on the next slide, you can choose to have very full bird feeders because you've got an oak tree, right? Or on the next slide, you can have very empty bird feeders or hardly any because you don't have hardly any trees in your mowed yard, right? And on the next slide, we hope your bird feeders are very, very full, but that's your choice. And on the next slide, even if you only have a couple, if they're the right plants like oaks, you're still adding something. And on the next slide, so we're not fooling the birds because they know to zero in on an oak tree and avoid that calorie pair if it did exist here. They know in that itty bitty brain of theirs, they know. Okay, here's an example again. You can barely see it, but there's a red weird shape like that around it, and that's just showing that the birds know where to go for the native tree. So on the next slide, they're labeled, again hard to see, but that's how they know to go to the black cherry, the oak tree, that's where the food is. All that other greenery in this subdivision, the birds are completely ignoring because there's no food for them there. So they're like, yuck, yuck. Okay, next slide. So compared to native landscapes, if you have a yard that's primarily introduced plants, which means non-native plants basically, you're going to produce 75% fewer caterpillars, far less likely to raise successful bird nests. The nests will contain fewer eggs, less likely to survive. They'll produce fewer adults, etc. You know, I mean, that shouldn't be too hard to understand by this point. So next slide. And again, if you have a yard that has less than 25% native plants, that's where the shaded part kind of starts looking funky. You're actually not supporting nature at that point. You're actually not having an impact, a positive impact on nature. So all these birds need those plants, and that's pretty much every bird, not just these birds. Next slide. So you don't have to save biodiversity for a living, and he'll also have a slide coming up. You don't have to have a yard that's 100% native plants, but whatever you can do matters. Next slide. So again, this has been the way it's been for millions of years, and it's the way it's going to be for millions of years. We're not going to change that. Next slide. And again, if those insects and caterpillars disappear because of habitat loss, there will be no bringing them back. Next slide. How many species do we need? And then the next slide is really cute. We need all of them. Aww. Next slide. So biodiversity is absolutely a requirement. And on the next slide, I think it's, yes. So he shows that we've done a pretty good job of messing up planet Earth here. And on the next slide, I think we're getting to planet Earth here. Yep, there's a great statistic here I like to quote. He said, but here's the key. This is how big the Earth was when humans appeared 2 million years ago, and this is how big it is today, the same size. How can we take more and more each day from the Earth if the Earth itself isn't growing? Because that's what we're doing. So next slide. And if you think that the life that was on this landscape is gone, there is no life here, mowed grass supports nothing. It's not even on the zip code chart, okay? It supports nothing. Next slide. So he's saying 86% of the U.S. east of the Mississippi is privately owned. Next slide. So we've got to raise the bar for what we do with what we privately own, because we can do all these things on our landscapes if we decide we want to. And next slide. Losing our pollinators is not an option, we hope. Next slide. We're not talking about good land stewardship, we're talking about essential land stewardship. And if you think your property is, you can get the resources to support nature by your neighbor's property, and your neighbor's property looks just like your property with a mowed expanse, that's not happening, right? So we all have to do what we can do. So these kinds of yards with the mowed grass have no food webs, very little carbon sequestration, and they're actively destroying the watershed, and they provide no pollinators, because grass only absorbs ½ an inch of water, and then all the rest of it runs off into the Indian River Lagoon, carrying with it all the pesticides and oil slicks and everything else it finds along the way. So next slide. Okay, so if you grew up in the landscaping world, this was our criteria for choosing plants in the past. On the left, we mostly chose them for decorative value, right? We chose plants because they were pretty, or they helped create a hedge, or they, made us feel good about looking at them. What he's asking on the next slide is, let's balance that equation a little bit. You could still have decorative value, but let's try to pick some plants that actually add to the food web, actually provide food for pollinators, etc. Let's just balance it out a bit. Next slide. So what does a biodiverse neighborhood look like? And if you go to the next slide, we could share our neighborhoods with wildlife if we created corridors, reduce the area we mow, and begin that transformation. He calls them alien ornamentals, that just means non-native, to using more native ornamentals. Next slide. So if this is an average lot in a subdivision with a nice mowed yard, what he's suggesting is you can still have a little bit of mowed yard for the kids or the grandkids or the dogs or whatever, but notice how on the edge of the property are a lot of trees and shrubs. That's the opportunity for an oak tree or things like that. And on the next slide, if you put a bunch of those kind of plots together, you can see down the diagonal middle there where all the trees are. Now you've created a corridor for the birds and for wildlife, and yet there's still a little bit of mowed yard in each of those yards. So you don't have to get rid of all the grass. Next slide. I think okay, good. I was hoping I didn't delete this. If we replanted half of the area we now mow, on the next slide, you can click through this pretty fast. That would be greater than the sum of all these national parks, because it would be 20 million acres. And if you can't read this, these are all the biggies. It's Yellowstone, Yosemite, Mount Rainier, the Grand Canyon, Denali, the Great Smoky Mountains. So half of our grass east of the Mississippi is greater than the sum of all those national parks. That's pretty amazing. Right. So if anybody been to Texas here? Yeah, Texas is great on the wildflowers. And so some of these pictures are from Texas, where they've replanted the medians and the road with wildflowers. And on the next slide, this is nothing, right? Nothing. Next slide. This is what it could be. That would be much more beautiful. On the next slide. This was somebody's side yard that they realized they were never using, so they replanted that with native wildflowers for pollinators. And next slide. This again is Texas on the road shoulder. I think that's such a cool picture. And on the next slide, so he's saying if you worked in corporate America, which probably most of us did at one time, would you like to go out to this kind of an area on your break time, or would you like to go out to the break area like this? If they had Wi-Fi at this area, I would be here, right? And they probably could do Wi-Fi in this area now. Right. So on the next slide, again, our streets could look like the ones on the right versus the left by having some nice tree canopy. Next slide. And again, just again, thinking about the choices we make with what we're putting in our yard. Next slide. Does your yard have to be 100% native? You don't have to be as crazy as me, and I'm not 100%. But this slide is so powerful because it's one of my favorite slides. Basically what it's saying, because this is going to stick with you, you're going to think about this tonight, I hope, okay? Basically, anything you're planting in your yard that's not native is a statue for you to enjoy, as if you went to a museum, right? Because it's not adding any benefit to wildlife whatsoever. So it made me really rethink about my yard. I'd go out in my yard and I'd say, do I really need that hibiscus bush or, you know, that croton? That's only there for my enjoyment. It's not there to help any wildlife whatsoever. And it helped me make some pretty tough choices because I'm like, it's out of there, right? At some point it's out of there. It doesn't have to be 100% out of there, but it helps you realize when you're out in your yard, you are allowed to have some statues, right? We all like art, but just realize that's what they are. They are statues for your enjoyment, not for any help for local wildlife. So how do you know when you've succeeded? We're wrapping it up here. You will see some leaves that have some, looks like somebody's been chewing on them, right? So that's a good sign. That is really good. And an oak tree supporting 500 species of caterpillars, you should see some chewed on leaves, right? That's a lot of eating. And what's so amazing about oak trees, when you stand back, it still looks like a gorgeous green tree. It doesn't look like something half eaten up. So oak trees know how to compensate for the fact that they support 500 species of caterpillars and they're going to lose a lot of leaves getting eaten on, right? They can handle it. That's a good thing. You're also going to see a lot of weird bugs, like this one down, oops, sorry. This one down here and that one up there. You're going to see bugs you don't recognize, but now you know bugs are good. They're full of protein and carotenoids, and somebody's going to eat those bugs, right? A baby bird. Somebody's happy that the bugs are there. You're also going to hear some baby birds squawking because now we know that every 3 minutes they got to get fed. And when I used to hear all this squawking in my backyard, I'm like, what the heck is up with this? It's not quiet and peaceful. But now I've learned to realize that that's music. That's like basically nature's music. And the baby birds, the parents know to build nests where there's a food source. So the fact that they've chosen my yard to have their nest with bird babies that have to get fed every 3 minutes really is a good thing. I'm glad they have. So now I'm kind of glad to hear the squawking every 3 minutes. I don't really time when does it stop. Are they really stopping right at 6 o'clock? I don't know. I don't really care if they are or they are not. But you'll hear that around your yard and you'll know that there's food there. And we do ask that people kind of take the bird feeders in when you hear that squawking because we want them to find the native plants. We don't want them to be trying to get by with birdseed. Okay, next slide. So we can save nature only if we learn to live with it. And how are we doing on time? We need to wrap it up? Okay, because I think the next few slides, if you go, okay, so we're going to go through this example that about the Atala butterfly, which is very similar to monarch butterfly, that it only eats kuntis. You've probably seen kunti plants around here. Great landscape plant, only gets this high. You never have to trim it. Always green all during the year. But that's the only food that the kunti, that the Atala butterfly can eat, and it almost got wiped out because kunti has a really big root like this, and the native Indians, yeah, they used to grind that up for flour. Now the Indians, native Indians were not the problem. Of course, the settlers were the problem. The settlers were the ones that over went after it and over farmed it and everything, and that just about wiped it out. But the hero of the story was that landscapers have since discovered this plant is always green, never has to be trimmed, great plant. So now they brought it back and the Atala butterfly has come back. Yeah, so that's like the next 10 slides in super summary. Yeah, yes, I know, there's such a great plant. So if you want to skip through all those, I think, yeah, there's the chrysalis, and yeah, you can't miss that thing, as could birds, they zero in right on it. So, yeah, you can keep going, because I think we're just about to the end. If you keep going, yep, landscaper save the day, keep going. Yep. So Mother Nature will give us one more chance, and then we should be coming up on the slide. This just more feeding birds here. This again is the one where the websites are. If you want to look up your zip code and find the plants that have the most benefit. And this is, Dr. Tallamy now has a homegrown national park website. So if you might want to get on it here for the church, because he's trying to track how many people are making a difference so we can get up to that 20 million acres. And if you've got even a quarter or an eighth of an acre of your property, he's trying to help people add that up to see their results. Okay, so next one. We are so blessed here to have so many native nurseries. I hear people up in Jacksonville, they have no native plant nurseries. That's like, ugh, I don't think I could handle that. Please buy your native plants at a native plant nursery. Don't buy them at a big box store, because chances are they weren't really grown in this area. They might have been grown in Florida somewhere, but not in Brevard County. These people are growing them in Brevard County. And I have cards on the back table. Yes, they're local cards. And if you go to the next slide, I think, yes, we're having our upcoming landscape tour. This is a great way to see ideas of how to do this in your yard. And this year, our homes on the tour are going to be in the Palm Bay and South Melbourne area. And that's just a great way to see kind of new, mature, intermediate yards of ideas to get. Every year the tour is someplace different. This year, for the first time, we're adding artists at the site, so that's going to be really cool to see some great local artwork. And the Melbourne Founders Museum, anyone familiar with this little museum? It's just a gem. Oh, did they? And they've got a gorgeous native landscape of the plants that were there at the time. Great. It's over, if you go east on University to Lipscomb and go north on Lipscomb, it's on the corner of Lipscomb and Brothers Avenue. Yeah, you'll see it right. They had to move the building out of the woods somewhere. Well, if you look at their website, I think it says it's open like the third Saturday of the month, but it is definitely going to be open the day of the tour on Sunday, November 9th. Yeah.
Do you have that? Is that part of your literature in the back?
We have a list to sign up for our newsletter, and we'll be putting out the publicity in our newsletter. But yeah. So we're pretty excited about our tour. This is one of our best sponsors year to year, Native Butterfly Flowers off of 192. Their cards are in the back. Great source for plants. And I think that's wrapping it up. Yeah, and just one other plug I want to make here. What did I do with it? Oh, yeah. We also have these books that two women came out with here in Florida on how to do your yard. This is a $20 book. I really wish I'd had this, 12 years ago when I started. Just really helps you go through and map out your yard and figure out where's the sun, the shade, the north, the south, the septic, the this, the that, and have a much better success plan in the short run. I've had to, learn some things the hard way and rip some things out and start over again, but this is like a great way to go if you're just starting. So that's pretty much it.